Hello and welcome. This is episode number 59 of the vCD Roundtable, and today's topic is going to be all around sovereign cloud in combination with all the updates of the Broadcom CSP program. Before I give a quick status or mention of how I would see the world at the moment, hello, Matthias.
Hello, welcome from my side. How I see the world. I think it's not flat. Um, so that's a first glimpse into how I see the world. Sasha, mindset.
Yeah, hello and welcome also from my side. Interesting time again. So yeah, let's start.
Yeah. The only
Again?
constant.
Did it ever
Still.
change being interesting?
It changes faster.
So the only constant in life is change.
Especially if you have to deal with Broadcom. So, quick update, everybody. We spoke about in the last episode already that Broadcom announced changes to the CSP program with the exception of the European Union. It seems like that is still currently the case. There were a few notices that people were getting confused with some legal statements from Broadcom, but current statement from Broadcom is still that a European Union is exempt from all the changes of the program. So white label would stay in place. So register tiers and everything else would stay in place. For me, stays the question how long this is going to be the case, because in all other territories, they caused quite a bit of a disruption with this. I still believe there is a future for all the programs and approaches to it, as there are enough signs for it. I think things will just get different names and potentially different approaches and legal motions or whatsoever. But as long as no one sees any paperwork, it's going to be hard to judge on that one. But the reasoning they said why Europe was exempt was not because of any legal issues with the European Union. They said this is because they think due to sovereign cloud, it's so necessary that we have so many more providers in Europe. Everybody can judge by themselves what they feel about that. But we wanted to take today's session to quickly talk about a lot of the notions in the last couple of months and weeks around sovereign cloud. I mean, the one big statement which came up was the one where Microsoft in France finally admitted that, yes, if they would be ordered, they would release any data. Oh, what a surprise. That was actually not really a surprise. I'm not sure why people were taking that as a real surprise, but that was that is one of the things which people currently take to again run down the storyline that any US company cannot be trusted at all. What I always add to that story is that also should imply any company which has a substantial business in the US, is traded at the New York Stock Exchange or anything else, because the Cloud Act can be enforced on everybody who is based on US soil, not only US companies, which would actually include quite a few of the larger telcos and everything else in Europe. So from that perspective, everybody should be careful. But what is VMware's or Broadcom's play in this whole story? And that is, from my perspective, actually quite interesting, because there is another European requirement which is in place or comes in place soon, which requires service providers to provide portability for their customers to move from off-prem to on-prem, and vice versa for any kind of services. There are a lot of legal questions around that. We were discussing that at the last Service Provider Summit in Germany, and a few others are constantly doing that. But actually, from that perspective, VMware is kind of, or actually quite a safe spot for service providers, because all they have to do, or all they would need to do under that regulation, is if a customer wants to move their VMware workload out, they can just actually take exported virtual machines, bring them back online on-prem, and be good to go, which is much more difficult on customized platforms, on other hyperscalers and everything else. So there is a good reasoning for European service providers to actually work with the VMware model, because not every other service provider model is that portable and easily to adapt and move. So that was my opening statement. Sasha, your opinions, your thoughts, your feelings.
Yeah, it's so everyone is talking about sovereign and data sovereignty, and in parallel, everyone is using the complete Microsoft stuff and AWS stuff, a lot of that, and I think it becomes more and more important and really good selling point for service providers to have a real sovereign cloud offering to their customers. I think that's a game we can, or we as a German European service provider, we can play and we can start with. So that's a good opportunity for your complete business from my perspective. And with VCF, we have a really good product for that, to provide a sovereign cloud. With our operations, you can run all your reports for the sovereign clouds and so on. You have a secure environment with NSX. So from that perspective, I think there are a lot of opportunities, and all the service providers who are currently not providing sovereign cloud should take a deeper look in that to sell it to the customers.
So Sasha, just taking up your argument about the M365 suite offered by Microsoft, I think it's not that simple, because we need to differentiate between communication and data storage or data placement. I think these are two different ball games, because most of the people, at least working in IT, should be aware that email communication is not a secure way unless you use encryption and other features which secures email communication. And from that from that perspective, I think it's okay to use M365. It's every company can decide if they would like to use SharePoint as a storage for their files. I know many people are doing it. That's a different story, but it's your own decision. But on the other hand, if you talk about data storage, like computer systems used to produce or to steer a factory which produces stuff, or your financial data or HR data, whatever, it's your decision where you place it. And if you talk about a sovereign cloud, it makes a perfect sense, because you can offer a service like pretty simple cloud service like cloud storage. And then as a CSP, you say, right, I'm based in Austria, and I, for example, guarantee that the data won't leave the country borders at all. Or you could say, I'm a bigger European service provider. We have subsidiaries in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And you can choose where data is stored. For example, I could store my data in Germany and have a backup in Austria, or vice versa. So I think there are many different options if we talk about sovereign clouds, but we should not mix like communication and the M365 stack with clouds or data sovereignty, which we should have in Europe, especially if we think about certain industries like lawyers or doctors, like medical data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, when I talked about M365, it was more about the data storage of OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, where really important information and information that normally must be secured are stored.
I agree, because a lot of those features you have mentioned, I just call it a feature or a service, they're just so easy to use. And if we have, for example, a Teams call, like, oh, there is the one document I would like to share. You just upload it to the Teams call, done, right? So it is already stored in SharePoint. Is it SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever. So it is that simple, and I think that's what you mean. But on the other hand, companies need to educate their employees how to handle data. And for example, we all have a Broadcom account as well. So we have to pass a yearly training provided by Broadcom, which talks about how to handle data, authenticity, authorization, where is data placed, and so on and so forth. And I think European companies need to do the same, not like such an online training, but they need to educate their employees which tools are used to exchange data. And if you use a certain tool, what is the process like? Is encryption mandatory or other security mechanisms?
I mean, that should actually be part in most European corporations. If they are following GDPR, they need to mandatory train their people once a year and handle it that way. If they don't do that, they have an audit issue and other things. But I think at the moment, the more important question is always like, when we talk about sovereign cloud, the question is, what are cloud services people are really looking forward? It's like, yes, if you look at the large hyperscalers, they have a huge amount of services, but let's face it, many companies are not using all of these services from that perspective. If we look at what VCF brings to the table, you have the majority of what's necessary. You can actually create virtual machines or container-based services with Kubernetes. You can actually create networks in a virtual fashion. You can create network security. You could use DSM for database services. You could use on top of all of that, all the reporting storylines you could build in the private AI stuff. So in general, what Broadcom has to bring to the table with VCF is already a pretty complete set of what I would say the majority of companies don't even need that complete set of functions. And that is something which is rare in the industry. It's not that you can actually go out there in the software industry and find 15 or 20 vendors which can provide you with the same or similar cloud stack with all these features and functionalities. So they might not all be perfect, but in comparison to building all of that yourself with open source tools, which you clearly could, is like, it's not wrong. It's all out there. It's like AWS, the majority of services are not necessarily built completely by AWS. And so it's possible to build all of that by yourself. But as a cloud provider, which most of our listeners are, it is far more complex, and that's where I would argue the overall the VCF stack, especially as we currently see it develop with the newer releases. I think we are on a way that Broadcom makes that pretty easy, and at the same point in time solves a bit of the challenge which most customers are now looking for as they potentially move out of hyperscalers. It is a platform which they can run on-prem the same way as they can run it as the CSP, which is a huge differentiator across many, many other options out there on the market. And I would argue it's potentially 2 or 3 vendors which have something which is coming at least near to what VMware has to offer. But that's it. And yes, the last option is you take a bunch of open source tools and build all of that yourself, and you involve a lot of manual work and labor to actually make all of that work. The question is, in the end, is that still then a profitable business? And how do you get stability? I mean, we were just on a call yesterday with a CSP where we were talking about audit, and they had the challenge that their auditor was now questioning, due to Broadcom's behavior, if Broadcom is a safe choice. But one of their responses was, it's like, okay, so how is open source a safe choice for us? Because yes, we have all the source code for the tools, but we don't have the people to maintain thousands or hundreds of different open source tools and manage them if something breaks.
Yes, and additional, how long will the community support the products, and do you get the right people to support the environments, and all of that additional. If you go to another vendor, are your employees currently fine with another vendor, changing vendors and so on? Yeah. But that's independent of Sovereign Cloud. So from my perspective, the Sovereign Cloud, you need an enterprise partner in the background for your customers to run it as a stable service. And yeah.
So I think it's an interesting time. It's interesting to see what's really going to happen, and because there is also the opportunity, which is still unclear, because Broadcom lately speaks a lot around the option that even if you are not a service provider, potentially that BYOL, so bring your own license, might be an option with some customers. You might not even need by BYOL if it's not a shared infrastructure. So it seems there is a lot of changes coming up from a contract perspective, which will make different working models feasible as well. Because it seems like that one of the challenges or one of the scenarios which Broadcom wants to address is they want to have more control about the end customer. You might like that or not like that as a service provider, however you want to structure that. But in the end, there seems to be a huge demand from Broadcom to be far more involved in the customer relationship. And potentially that is when we hear a lot of the talking, especially when it comes down to service providers dealing with larger customers, a lot is around the fact that they say is like, yeah, they could use bring your own license, and that would actually ease the whole process. A lot of the Pinnacle providers already have a BYOL offering out there and actually provide that to the market and actually provide that as an option for their customers. So it seems like that there are things going on in that direction, but the question is really is like how well is the customer or how well is are the end customers really willing to actually go for that? Because the other reason in many cases to utilize a cloud service was to get out of maintaining service provider licenses. Plus, you then still have the complexity potentially. I could bring my VMware licenses, but then I also have other products like operating systems and stuff like that. Would I then also start going back into licensing them myself? Would that change then potentially the behavior where currently customers consume CSP licenses? Can they consume a CSP, for example, Microsoft or Red Hat license, if they bring their own virtualization license? There is a lot of uncertainty with that setup at the moment. So it's really going to be interesting how this evolves in the next couple of weeks. But again, as we said before, there is no need at the moment to rush. I totally understand that people want to have a solution, but all current contracts are all valid until March 27 at least. So from that perspective, everything is gives you enough time to react to that one. Because when I read media, it sounds like you can switch the platform within a matter of weeks. At least that's what all the competition says. I don't believe any of that, but that's a different story.
Can be done in days or hours.
Oh, that was moving legacy applications to Kubernetes. Wasn't that one of your customers in Austria?
No, we're not talking about anything like that. I'll just say lift and shift. But that's a different story.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Maybe another option could be that we might see in Europe or just in a few countries in Europe, CSPs with like industry specific offerings, like tailored offerings for lawyers or for hospitals or something like this. because these topics deal with very sensitive data. So data sovereignty is very important for those customers. So maybe we will see more offerings which are for just a very specific industry. Could be. It's just, I think, with the whole cloud and data sovereignty, CSPs need to be more creative, coming up with an idea how to build a service to meet certain requirements.
It's not only that. I think one of the other aspects which service providers can actually provide a, let's say, more attractive offering to customers at the moment is the whole security scenario. I mean, it's not 1 or 2 day, every second day or so, there is either a larger company or public sector or a university or a hospital or something like that hijacked by ransomware. And this is a huge opportunity for service providers to also make clear that they can provide the security services around that, which is sometimes not easily possible for smaller companies to actually set up anything like that because it's a truly complex scenario. And from that perspective, combining that with a sovereign cloud offering might be a very, very attractive scenario to build that and to structure something like that for future needs. Because in the end, I'm not sure if many of the people who are currently running on the back of AWS, Microsoft, or Google, or any or whoever actually of the very, very large CSPs, what many people I think also underestimate is, even though it's not advertised, but how much additional security is actually provided by these services, which they are actually silently doing to protect their own infrastructure, which potentially, if you run all of that yourself again, will be lost. And this is really, which is something, is like when you hear on security conferences the sheer amount of attacks some of these large hyperscalers have to deal with on a per minute basis. If all of the workloads from Europe would actually disappear from there, that attack vector would actually go somewhere else. And I'm not sure if everybody who's going to host that, especially if people would take all of that back on-prem, if they are capable of actually dealing with that fact as well. Because that is something which people tend to not talk about, because a lot of these hyperscalers don't talk about that because it's not an advertised services for liability issues. Because if they were to say, is like, hey, we provide added security services and certain types of additional security services, they would be in a liability issue. So a lot of that is being done silently without ever talking about it.
I think that's a very important topic, what you mentioned with the security, and that you need to secure your environment, and a lot of end customers are not able to secure the environment. But from my perspective, it's not only the way securing the environment in deploying applications, it's also in have a documented environment, have all the required documents available for an audit. So that's also one, from my perspective, a real big part that you need to have in place. So also on you as a service provider side, it's important that you have your documentation in place. Because if you have an incident and a customer is impacted from this incident, it's very important that you have all your environment correctly documented. That you have your backup disaster recovery plans in place and all of that stuff.
I think it's overall, it's documentation, it's being able to react, it's all of these bits and pieces which service providers need to comply with. But this is also something which a friend of mine at one of the service provider summits, I think last year, made a good point about, with all the EU regulations and whatever we come up with, where many people say it's like, this is going to be difficult for the hyperscalers to manage or to deal with. Is like, let's face it, they have so much money and so many people they can throw at regulations and paperwork. It's much easier for them to solve that. And whenever smaller service providers celebrate any one of these new regulations, it's typically where you go is like really read through it and figure out for yourself. Like currently, this whole story of being enforced to provide customers the way out of the cloud and everything else. That is going to be hugely interesting on how this is going to be handled in reality, because the people in our EU Parliament who actually decided that moving out of a public cloud is as simple as taking your phone number from one cell carrier to another one. Potentially you don't know the complexity out of it, because when you, depending on how you interpret the law, you could in theory now go to Amazon and say, it's like, I want to take my database and want to move it somewhere else, tell me how to do that. And while I'm pretty sure the large ones have either legal responses to that or technical responses to that, a lot of other service providers will be caught pretty off guard by this in the next couple of months, as once first customers are going to execute one of that. And that's, again, coming back to documentation and everything else, you should be able to do that. And that also requires true multi-tenancy, which we all know in many cases service providers are not necessarily doing that. It's like, I have seen enough service providers where they are not even necessarily separating databases when they provide SQL Server database services or stuff like that, and have that all messed up. And if there is one customer now coming and saying, it's like, oh, I want to have my data and I want to have it now and tell me how to reinstall it somewhere else, this is going to be really interesting. Okay. So that's that much on the fact of sovereign cloud. So to a certain degree, I think that yes, Broadcom will need a lot more service providers in Europe. On the other hand, I do not necessarily expect that we, if they are continuing the path they have continued in all other territories, it will not just actually be as is. There will be some change. Whether that change is going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years, there will be a change coming. So that is going to be interesting. I think on the other side, for service providers, VCF or vSphere plus Cloud Director plus all the other tools is still one of the best options if you want to offer certain types of services, especially in light of all the EU regulations on what all the services, auditing, and everything else you need to provide, because you have platforms which are just relatively easy to get through all of these procedures, which is going to be more difficult. So it's going to be interesting. But that is more or less my closing phase for the sovereign cloud topic. Anything to add, Matthias?
Yeah, famous last words. I think with the change in the current ongoing change in the Broadcom partner program and the results we're going to have in the near future based on these changes, combined with ideas European CSPs are coming up with, we will see many new or different offerings in the near future. I think that's a change we can expect, at least my opinion. Sasha, some famous last words.
Yeah, so from my perspective, sovereign cloud is a big part, will be a big part in the future. Take this as one of the points with you when you take your decision for your future. And if you think about to, offboard the Broadcom stuff, offboard VCF, vCD, and so on. So have everything in mind and compare the products in a way where you can really say, hey, I took a look at every single part I need for the future for my service provider business.
Okay. That being said, I think next episode is our pre-Explore episode. That will be directly in the week before Explore. Or is it at Explore? No, it's before Explore. So at that stage, we should have all the final information about what's going on at Explore. It seems like that Broadcom is still working on the backyards and making some last-minute changes on advisory boards, councils, and everything else which is going to take place. We are going to be there with 3 nights. So we will also attend the night events and can give you some input on what's happening at the night events as well. Afterwards, we will have some documentation more or less ready by then. And yeah, we will keep you updated what's going to happen at Explore in our next episode. We hope to see quite a few of our listeners during Explore, meet you in person. If you are joining us there, feel free to ping any one of us. Matthias is not going to join us, but Sasha and I are going to be there. So feel free to ping us. We are happy to chat with you and directly exchange what's going to be next around this. So talk to you soon in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
You, bye-bye.
Bye.